After switching to his barbarian, all Faye could feel was his brutal physical strength. It made him felt like he could collapse the firm defensive wall with a single stomp. My strength increased so much after I leveled up the barbarian to level 12. Faye felt like he was the ocean and could tear up anything in his way. This is it. This is exactly how I feel as a barbarian in the Diablo world. This never-ending strength made him feel like Hercules. He glanced down subconsciously. His expression was strange. He gasped as his eyes opened wide, as if he saw an undead creature walking around in the real world. He found something unimaginable. Not sure when, but the heavy knight armor he was wearing in the real world was gone. It was replaced with exquisite-looking armor. The style of the armor was exotic. It was made with an unknown material. There were a lot of mysterious symbols all over the armor, and they all shined a green light. There was a strong magic energy in it. Except the armor, he was also wearing a pair of leather boots, helmet, gloves, belt. Faye recognized them all. These are the items of my barbarian character. How did I bring them into this world? What's going on? Oh my God. I don't remember converting these items from that voice. The unexpected discovery made Faye's heart race. How did this happen? Faye's mind was blank. There was no explanation for this. From his previous experience, if he wanted to bring anything, even a pile of monster crap to the real world, he had to get it converted by that mysterious voice. He had to pay the fee and bear the risk of not succeeding. What confused Faye was that he didn't ask to convert the items, but was able to bring them to the real world. What's going on? Hint. After the player's character exceeds level 10, the player can use the character's items in other worlds other than the Diablo world. Hint. The items can only be used by the player. They can't be traded, lost, or repaired by blacksmiths in other worlds. Hint. The durability of items will decrease naturally. They can only be repaired in the Diablo world. Hint, hint. As if that voice had heard all of Faye's questions, many hints had given Faye a detailed explanation. So, that's how it is. Faye tapped his forehead, his mind was clear. So that's the benefit of exceeding level 10. Will there be more benefits after I exceed level 20, 30, or even 90? Faye tried to ask that voice greedily. Unfortunately, there was no response. Okay. Don't tell me you don't want to. If I can bring items to the real world, then weapons should be included too. Why don't I have my double-handed axe? As soon as that thought came to his head, something magical happened. A white light flashed and he felt something heavy in his hand. The huge and dangerous double-handed axe that Barbarian Faye had appeared in his hands. Faye swung the axe subconsciously. The axe's handle was cold, and so was the light that the axe blade reflected. A familiar sensation filled Faye's mind. He felt like the axe was an extension of his body and he had complete control of it. He felt invincible. Faye didn't get addicted to that feeling. He forced himself to calm and evaluate his situation. If my main weapon was brought out of the Diablo world, then I can probably use Azure Spiked Shield and Storm Saber? 2. A yellow light flashed in front of him as he thought about that. The axe disappeared, and a gold-engraved sword and a dark red shield took its place. Wahahaha. Just like I thought. Faye found it super easy to switch his weapons. As long as he thought about it, the weapons would switch. There was no cooldown on that. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As Faye's thoughts quickly changed, the double-handed axe and the sword and shield kept on switching in his hands. This speed and method of switching weapons in a fight would definitely be a trump card. The best would be for him to use it as a sneak attack. This fit Faye's personality perfectly. Faye played around with this new skill, and he suddenly thought about a big problem. Although it's great to bring the powerful and magical items into the real world, I won't wear these all the time. I'm a king. I'm not going to battle every single day. If I go to noble parties, go to the washroom, and go to bed like this, I will probably be called a pervert. I wonder if I would hide these items? When Faye was thinking, changes occurred again. The barbarian items he was wearing disappeared as he wished. A soft white knight armor appeared on his body. It was the clothes he was wearing inside the heavy metal armor. However, he didn't know where the heavy metal armor went. He glanced around and found it at a corner. He didn't know how or when that armor was taken off his body. Damn. I can get anything I want? A big smile came on Faye's face. So the weapons and armor of the barbarian can appear and disappear as I wish. This is so convenient. It's not going to affect my normal life at all. This is too sick. Faye's heart started to race again. Adrenaline coursed through his blood. He licked his lips. As a man that likely maximizing his benefit all the time, he thought of another question. If these magical items are brought to the real world, I can probably use their special properties too, right? Faye was so excited that he almost had a boner. He decided to do a little experiment to test the storage effect of his belt. In the Diablo world, belts granted characters more storage space on top of the item slot, and it was more convenient to use than the item slot. The better quality the belt, the more storage space it had. The belt that Faye had only had 8 storage space. He looked down at the belt, then looked at a fist-sized rock on the corner. He called on the rock in his mind, trying to put it into the storage space in the belt. Almost at the same exact moment as Faye thought about it in his mind, the rock disappeared. Damn! Did it work? Faye's heart skipped a beat after he saw the rock disappear. Faye felt his heart wouldn't be able to handle the series of surprises. His greedy hypothesis was confirmed without any doubt. The special properties of the items in Diablo were brought into the real world. Faye thought about the storage space in the belt, and the 8 units of storage space appeared in front of his eyes, as if he was using a pair of Google glasses. The rock was sitting in one of the storage spaces. Except for the rock, the 2 bottles of normal healing potions, and 1 bottle of stamina potion that costed Faye 29,000 gold coins to convert was inside the belt as well. Faye quickly pressed his hands on his heart. It has to stop beating so fast and irregularly, or I'm seriously going to fucking die. As if he was a kid that just got his favorite toy. Faye couldn't hold himself back as he played around with the belt a bit more. Whoosh dash the rock appeared in his hand. Whoosh dash the rock disappeared into the belt storage. He controlled everything with his mind, as if the belt was hooked up to his brain. He tried again with some different sized rocks on the ground inside the partially ruined tower. Faye quickly tested out the capacity of the storage space. Each slot in the storage space could only contain items up to the size of a basketball, but the weight of the items didn't matter. Therefore, the 8 storage space slots in the belt could hold items up to the size of 8 basketballs. Faye was very satisfied with the capacity. As the level of his barbarian increased, Faye would be able to get higher quality belts, which would only increase the amount of slots they had. Finally, I have my own secret storage. This unexpected surprise really delighted Faye. These surprises made Faye realize that there were way more secrets and discoveries to be made in the Diablo world that somehow resided inside his mind. Rogue Encampment was only a novice map. As he leveled his character, he would be able to step into higher-level maps such as Lutgolian and Korosdox. He felt there were a ton of unimaginable things waiting for him. After he felt the monstrous strength of the barbarian, he said, "Switch mode," in his mind, and Sorcerer Faye took over. His enormous physical strength disappeared instantly, and Faye felt the magic powers and spell-casting abilities of a level 3 sorcerer. Although sorcerers and necromancers were both mages, their powers were completely different. The necromancer's power was dark, cold, and daunting, while the sorcerer's power was bright and just. Fire, ice, and lightning were all natural forces. After Faye switched to sorcerer mode, a firm force field surrounded him. It was just as ominous as the necromancer's force field, but had different affinities. Sizzle, sizzle dash, a fireball appeared and hovered in his hands as Faye said, "Fire bolt," in his mind. The bright red fireball was dancing in the wind, and its size changed as Faye wished. Although it looked weak, Faye was sure that this fireball contained a significant amount of energy. It was far more powerful than Gil's novice fireball. Could completely melt metal armor. That was the power of Sorcerer Faye. After he closed his eyes to get used to the power of the sorcerer, he made the force field that surrounded him disappear, and no one could tell he was a mage by looking at him anymore. Faye then switched to Paladin mode. Suddenly, a divine and gentle power filled Faye's body. The power was strong to the point that it leaked out of his body. The energy was so bright and compassionate that it would make anyone who felt this energy come closer and trust and depend on Faye unconditionally, as if he was the god's messenger. Paladins were the most noble and righteous class in the Diablo world. Paladins' most powerful skills were called aura. Except for its combat abilities, it also had unimaginable healing and supporting abilities. Is the power of the Holy Church that Angela talked about the same as the paladins from Diablo world? Faye wondered. While he was thinking, his body quickly got used to the auras of the paladin. He stood there and repeated all the abilities and skills of the 4 characters. After he was sure that he wouldn't forget anything, he switched back to barbarian mode, wore his soft white knight armor instead of his barbarian items, and walked out of the watchtower. His reappearance was like a bright torch in complete darkness, and it drew the attention of everyone on the defensive wall. The soldiers stared at him in awe. They all hoped that the powerful king who could communicate with the god of war could create a miracle again in such a dangerous situation and defeat the vicious enemies who were about to siege the castle. They wanted him to give them hope for survival. However, 3-star warrior Lampard, 1-star warrior Oleg, Brooke, novice mage Gil, and a couple other people stared at Faye in fright and shock. Only those who had energy and powers themselves truly understood what had happened in the partially ruined watchtower. In a short moment, a gloomy power, a wild power, a natural power, and a divine power. For different types of powers appeared consecutively inside the watchtower, as if there were 4 1-star warriors and mages hiding in there, fully displaying their power. But it was impossible. They all knew that only one person was in that watchtower, the young King Alexander. There was no else except him. This meant that there was only one possible explanation for what happened. All of the 4 different powers belonged to the king. Oh God! Can one man acquire 4 different types of power? Moreover, each power is least at the 1-star level. This isn't possible. In the history of Azeroth continent, there were examples of a person becoming proficient in a couple different powers. It wasn't impossible. But which one of those people weren't famous geniuses in order to be able to make progress in learning different powers? Which one of them weren't sun-ranked masters? Moreover, all the traveling poets who told stories of them around the continent could swear with their lives that those geniuses were far from young when they made progress. How old was Alexander? Not even 18 yet. Alexander was only famous because he was a retard. This retard wasted 17 years of his life, eating, sleeping, and seeking fun. He never had any form of warrior or mage training. How could he possibly have 4 different types of powers? And all these power were at least 1-star rank. These feelings were circulating in Lampard and the others' minds. They stared at Faye as he walked out of the tower as if he was Godzilla. Faye knew he was the center of attention. He smiled gently at the anxious soldiers and new recruits, calming them down. He beckoned to Pierce and Brooke, calling them over to the watchtower. He didn't acknowledge Oleg, who was trying to get his attention, and Head Minister Bazar, who wasn't too far away either. It was a rather clear signal. Even the farmers who knew nothing about politics understood that the 2 former powerful figures, Bazar and Oleg, had lost the king's appreciation and trust. Brooke, tell me about the enemy's movements, Faye asked as he looked at the crowd of enemies on the bridge. He stood beside a battlement and touched the marks left there by the swords and lances. Your Majesty, during the past 4 hours that you were resting, the enemies didn't move at all for some reason. They didn't even harass us with any fake attacks. It's almost as if they are waiting for something, but... Brooke pointed behind the enemies. His voice was filled with worry. They have moved their last 3 siege ladders and sieging equipment that they made in the last couple days onto the bridge. They are fully prepared, and there are even more enemy soldiers participating in this siege compared to the previous battle. Once they decide to attack, we will be in an extremely dangerous situation. Faye looked at the place that Brooke was pointing at. There were some major changes in the enemy formation. The tower shield formation was still at the very front, protecting all the enemies behind it using a huge black wall. It was only steps away from the north bank of the Zuli River, where Chambord Castle was located. However, the formations behind it were very different. The archers, spearmen, and swordsman formations had moved back, and in their place were the 3 siege ladders which the enemies had moved onto the bridge. Behind the siege ladders, there were 4 or 5 giant wooden walls made out of wet, green trees to block off arrows. Even further away, there were 670 feet, 20 meters, tall trebuchets that were protected by the stronger enemy warriors. Faye's pupils quickly contracted when he saw that. The 6 trebuchets were lethal siege machines. They were much more threatening than the siege ladders. Once they got within 200 yards of the defensive wall, regardless of how firm and strong the defensive wall was, it would be blown apart. The defensive wall of Chambord and the less than 1,000 soldier army would be wiped out in less than 20 boulder throws by the trebuchets. The enemy's commander had definitely put a lot of resources into this siege, so he wanted to conquer Chambord Castle today. Those wooden walls were made in a rush, and there are still green leaves on the wood. However, the 6 trebuchets couldn't have been made quickly, but they've never appeared in the sieges before. Did the enemies get some reinforcements? Faye licked his lips subconsciously as he thought about that. There was no way that Chambord could defend against that. Once the enemies began their siege, the wooden walls could easily block the rain of arrows and get the trebuchets into range. Chambord seemed to be doomed. This was an unequal warfare. Aside from the huge gap in the strength between the enemies and them, the enemy's commander was also very careful and sneaky. He knew that Chambord didn't have too many soldiers, so he focused on that weakness. Brooke and the others couldn't come up with any strategies that could break open the cage that Chambord was in. Faye frowned as he evaluated the situation. Brooke was observing Faye's expression. He was about to say something, but he held himself back. Say what you want to say. As the future general commander of Chambord, hesitating doesn't look good. Faye noticed Brooke's behavior and joked. Brooke got really close to Faye and whispered into his ears, "Your Majesty, maybe we can't defend this one. I'm willing to stay behind with the soldiers to try to defend against the enemies and buy more time. Please let Mr. Lampard and Pierce take a team of elite soldiers to protect you and Ms. Angela to leave Chambord from the back mountain." No. Faye shook his head and rejected Brooke's suggestion before he even finished. He didn't say a single word more, but just from his rejection and him shaking his head, Brooke and Pierce felt the young king's determination. No matter what was going to happen, the king wouldn't back down nor flinch. Faye's expression excited and pleased the two, but it also made them really anxious. "We can't wait any longer. We need to initiate an attack," Faye said as he tapped the battlement with his finger. This sentence was as shocking as thunder, and exploded in their ears. Initiate an attack? Brooke and Pierce were stunned. What did initiating an attack under such circumstances with so few soldiers, most with no formal training, mean? It meant that Faye was giving up on the terrain advantage and planning to attack the enemies like smashing a hard rock with an apple pie. The fate of the apple pie could easily be determined. "Your Majesty is... Won't that be too risky?" Brooke was trying to get Faye to change his mind. "There is no time." Faye shook his head as he said decisively, "If I'm not wrong, the enemies will attack right after lunch. The only way for us to survive in this war is to think of the unimaginable and do the unexpected. If we wait any longer, the enemies will begin the siege, and the only thing we will face is death." Faye slowly looked at the two as he said that. Looking at the confused expressions of the two warriors, Faye said, "What do you think, my warriors? Do you guys have the courage to go with me and send all those bastards into the Zuli River so they can take the last bath of their lives?" The question was as simple as asking for his friend's opinions. At that very moment, Brooke and Pierce felt like the blood in their bodies was on fire. "Your Majesty, it's our honor." Their voices trembled as they responded. "All right, I need you guys to do something. Brooke, go and tell all the soldiers to rest. Remember, only keep a couple smart ones to watch the enemy's actions. Also, go find 20 reliable and loyal strong men and bring them to me. Pierce, you go and get these for me?" Faye whispered into Pierce's ear, and the white-haired tough guy left in confusion. After they left, Faye stood quietly on the defensive wall. He repeated and organized all the things that he needed to pay attention to in upcoming operation in his mind, and then turned around and walked to his left. He walked to the number 1 warrior of Chambord, under the gazes of all the soldiers. "Your Majesty," Lampard nodded. The number 1 warrior, who was normally cold to Faye, had finally lowered his guard and proactively talked to him. Faye knew that his series of heroic feats had gained the trust and respect of this master. Lampard had protected the peace of Chambord and stabilized the retarded Alexander's throne by his individual strength. Faye was very grateful for that. Faye also heard that Lampard was the closest friend of the old king, so he Faye's elder as well. "Uncle Lampard, I have something that requires your assistance." Faye was very polite. Lampard looked at Faye, and then turned around to look at the black flood of enemies. He was silent for a couple seconds, but then asked, "You want me to help you destroy those trebuchets, right? I only have about 30 to 40% confidence in destroying 2 or 3 of them." Destroy the trebuchets? Faye was surprised, but he quickly understood what Lampard was thinking. He shook his head and said seriously, "Uncle Lampard, that's not what I am asking. It's like this. I'm going to leave the castle and attack the enemies soon, so I want you to stay on the defensive wall and stabilize the situation here. If I end up dying, I want you to take care of Angela for me. Please protect her and Emma and leave Chambord safely." Lampard didn't expect Alexander to have such a request. In such a dangerous situation, the first thing that came to Faye's mind was not his own safety, but the safety of Angela and Emma. This raised his image of Alexander by a couple points. However, it was only a couple points because of Faye's decision to leave the castle and initiate the attack, which lowered his image. Even the dumbest person in Chambord could tell that initiating an attack would be worst decision ever. It would only get the precious soldiers of Chambord killed for no returns. Moreover, it would give the well-trained and equipped enemies an even bigger advantage. Lampard accepted the fact that Alexander was strong and brave looking back at the siege battle the day before, to a point where it was way beyond his estimations. However, when it came to warfare, if one didn't have the strength or power of a moon-ranked master, individual strength wouldn't solve many problems. Lampard didn't want to see Alexander become arrogant after a couple wins. "If I use a sneak attack, maybe I can destroy those trebuchets, so you don't have to rush towards your death." For the old friend whose soul was already in heaven, and for the pure and innocent Angela, Lampard decided that even though his old hidden internal injuries had relapsed, he had to try to destroy those trebuchets. They were the biggest threat to Chambord. However, there was a huge risk. The only hope he had was if the trebuchets weren't protected by high-star ranked warriors or mages. "Uncle Lampard, it's not just the problem of a few trebuchets. In this situation, even if you could destroy all the trebuchets, Chambord won't hold long under the enemy attacks. Relax. A guy that is terrified of death like me won't do anything too risky." After Faye said that, his expression became serious and he got closer to Lampard. He whispered, "Besides, you have to stay on the defensive wall. You are the only one that can restrain the hidden poisonous snake." Lampard's expression suddenly changed. "You found out as well?" A mysterious smile came onto Faye's face. He nodded slightly. Too bad I only discovered a few clues. I'm not sure who it is exactly, but I feel like you're the only who can temporarily contain him." Lampard nodded, but his expression tightened the next second. He glanced at Faye. A blue water-like energy suddenly appeared and covered his right arm. He didn't say anything and stepped up, and the energy that covered his arm grew even bigger. A punch that was as fast as lightning was aimed at Faye's chest. The mountain-like pressure exploded and pressed on everyone surrounding Lampard and Faye as the punch traveled towards Faye. No one would have thought that the number 1 warrior of Chambord would attack King Alexander. Numerous gasps sounded on the defensive wall. However, it seemed like Faye was expecting it, and was not scared at all. Whoosh! Faye threw a punch as well. There weren't any skills contained in the punch. It was pure physical strength. Although it didn't contain any energy, the fist had left a series of afterimages as it blew through the air. Boom! The 2 fists collided with each other forcefully. Suddenly, An enormous energy wave exploded outward from the center of the collision. Like a strong cyclone, the nearby soldiers had to close their eyes to deal with the huge blast. Some of them even yelled as they were pushed back by the energy wave. They couldn't even hold on to their weapons. The blue water-like energy that covered Lampard's right arm was shattered and quickly disappeared. Lampard himself shook as he barely stood still. Faye was sent back 3 steps by the collision. His breathing was rapid. His right hand felt numb and his right arm was sore and in pain. "Nice!" Lampard nodded. He was pleased as he looked at Faye. However, he was even more surprised and shocked. Faye's progress was almost too ridiculous for him to understand. The number 1 warrior finally agreed with Faye's decision. "Your strength is enough to protect yourself down there. Okay, I will stay on the defensive wall and you can initiate the attack. But remember, if the situation gets too dangerous, don't be stubborn. Destroy a few trebuchets and come back with the soldiers. We just have to hold them off for a little bit longer. Zenith Empire will soon be notified and reinforcements will arrive," Lampard said with a complex expression on his face. This was the first time that Lampard had said this much to Alexander. Although he didn't say too much, Faye felt the care and concern that Lampard had for him. Trust me, I will know what to do." Faye bowed to Lampard, then turned around and walked back to the watchtower. When Lampard attacked him, Faye knew that he was testing his strength. Lampard would only let him leave the castle if his strength was up to Lampard's standards. The test also verified Faye's prior predictions. A level 12 barbarian could defeat a 2-star warrior, but would have a hard time battling against a 3-star warrior. When Lampard punched him, Faye tried to counter it with all the strength he had, but that only shattered the energy that covered Lampard's arm. Faye, on the other hand, was pushed back a couple steps and lost control of the battle. "I have to improve my strength fast," Faye decided. Once Chambord overcame this situation, he would go back to the Diablo world right away to level up his characters and increase his strength and power. The only way to survive and protect his close ones on this war-filled Azeroth continent was to be powerful and have a strong influence. When Faye got back to the watchtower, Brooke was waiting for him with 20 tough men. These guys were all about 7 feet tall, 210 centimeters, and half-naked, displaying their super muscular body that contained explosive powers. They were covered in dark body hair, which made them look like humanoid beasts from the wilderness. These were the strong men that Brooke picked out. "Boom! Boom!" Faye nodded and hammered the chest of a big guy who was standing beside him. "Warrior, tell me your name." "Drogba, your majesty." "Ditter Drogba." "All right, show me your strength, Warrior Drogba," Faye asked while smiling. A humble smile appeared on Drogba's face as he heard that. He looked around and walked to the watchtower. He bent his back and held onto a square battlement that had a 5-yard, 5 meters width. His upper body muscles rose as he applied force and he picked it off of the ground firmly. Faye was delighted. The battlement was at least 700 pounds, but Drogba didn't have any trouble picking it up. It seemed like that was not his limit. Faye had to admit that the people on Azeroth continent had much stronger bodies compared to people on Earth. This man called Drogba could easily win the strongman world competition on Earth. "Great! Such an invincible warrior," Faye appraised Drogba as he laughed. He walked up to Drogba and single-handedly grabbed the battlement from Drogba. He applied some force to the battlement and it flew tens of yards, away. Boom! The battlement crushed into the ground and blew up a ton of dust. The ease Faye had when throwing the battlement had shocked the 20 strong men. Drogba was the strongest among them all, and he only picked up the battlement with 2 hands, yet King Alexander threw the battlement single-handedly as if it was a water battle. What kind of strength was that? Unthinkable! The strong men were 100% conquered. They stared at Faye with excitement. That was what Faye wanted to see. In the barbarian mode, a level 12 barbarian could exert about 5,000 pounds of force. Limitless physical strength was the definition of a barbarian. The only way to transform these strong, muscular men into loyal subordinates was to beat them at what they did best. "You guys are the strongest men in Chambord in terms of your physical strength, but I'm not sure if your courage is as strong as your physical strength," Faye stimulated the strong men to pump up their morale. After Faye finished talking, all the men's eyes turned red from rage. Some of them pumped their chests and others cracked their joints. They couldn't wait to show what they are made of. Ha ha ha. Great. I'm going to leave the castle and teach those bastards a memorable lesson. How about that? Do you guys dare to go with me and make them run back to their mommies? Faye suddenly turned around and pointed at the enemies that were on the bridge, like a giant crawling snake. Your Majesty, I've wanted to go and teach them a lesson for a long time now, the big guy Drogba yelled as he swung his fists. Your Majesty, I want to be the head soldier and charge at the very front. I can fuck them all up by myself. Ha ha ha. How could I be scared of them? I've smashed 21 skulls, and I don't mind smashing a couple more. After the strong men heard Faye's decision, none of them were scared, but rather excited. They couldn't wait to charge into the enemies. At this moment, Your Majesty, what you need is ready. Pierce yelled from far away. It attracted everyone's attention. There were about 40 soldiers following Pierce. They sweated as they carried sets of astonishing ultra-heavy knight armor up the defensive wall. The sets of heavy metal armor were quickly placed beside the watchtower. There were 22 sets in total, and they looked like they were gifted from the hands of Aphrodite. They shined under the bright sunlight. These were the precious heavy knight armor sets that the old king had collected throughout his life. They were made from an extremely strong metal, 100-wrought iron, mixed with steel essence. They looked magnificent, were very valuable, and provided a ton of defensive capability. Ordinary weapons couldn't break through it. The old king treated these armor sets as if they were national treasures, and he wasn't even willing to take them out of the king's palace. He never used them and only occasionally wiped them down carefully. These sets of armor were as precious as his own life. However, Faye moved these national treasures onto the defensive wall today as if they were paper. After noticing what was going on, most of the people on the wall had no idea what King Alexander was going to do. They chatted among themselves quietly as they stared at Faye's direction with curiosity and excitement. What do you think, my warriors? Are you guys able to wear the armor? Faye pointed at the 22 shiny heavy knight armor and asked. Not a problem, Your Majesty. After seeing the armor, the strong men were extremely excited, as if they were rabbits that encountered a ton of carrots. The passion that the warriors had towards excellent weapons and armor never decreased. All right, time is tight. Pick a fitting armor and put it on as fast as you can. We don't have a lot of time left. These men were strong and straightforward. After Faye ordered, they didn't hesitate and quickly picked up the armor they wanted. Pierce, pick one up too. Come with me later. Awesome. Pierce was thrilled. He laughed as he picked up a set of armor. Although the armor had a ton of defense, because they were made out of 100-wrought iron mixed with even heavier steel essence. Every armor set weighed about 60 to 70 pounds. This was why Faye asked Brooke to pick out the strongest men in Chambord. Because an ordinary person wouldn't even be able to walk properly after they put that on. Killing enemies in that armor was literally a joke. These 20-some strong men were all the manpower that Faye needed for this attack. Although these men weren't star-ranked warriors and didn't have any energy, they were super strong. After wearing the heavy armor that granted them sick defense, they would be like 20 hunger tigers that just got out of a cage. If they were utilized properly on that narrow bridge, they would be more powerful than the star-ranked warrior on both sides. Faye didn't plan to attack the enemies with too many people from the start. He glanced at Brooke. The second commander of the King's Guards was also a one-star warrior, so he was a perfect candidate for this operation. However, there had to be a strategic commander on the defensive wall, just in case something unexpected happened and the situation on the defensive wall fell into chaos. Faye thought about it for a couple seconds, but ultimately decided to keep Brooke on the defensive wall. He looked past Brooke and saw Warden Oleg sitting at the gap on the defensive wall. He beckoned to him and signaled the flatterer to come close to him. Go and pick a set of armor. Faye didn't say or express anything more. Oleg was confused. He was pretty far from the watchtower, so he didn't know what was going on. He thought that the king was being really generous and was granting him a set of armor to protect himself in the upcoming siege. A bright smile came onto Oleg's face as he rushed to the last set of armor that was sitting on the ground and put it on really fast. Quickly, some soldiers carried ultra-big weapons onto the defensive wall. These huge heavy weapons were from the king's palace as well. They were also part of the old king's precious collection. However, Faye took them out at the perfect time and utilized all their values. Bam bam! 21 weapons were dropped onto the ground. There were axes and hammers, all of which looked monstrous. They gave off a dark feeling, and anyone who looked at them would become depressed. When they touched the ground, they smashed into the brick flooring on the defensive wall, cracking the flooring and forming many pits. They were really heavy. Everyone, get a comfortable weapon. After they heard the king's order, they rushed to grab the weapons that they wanted. Pierce got a pair of exotic-looking warhammers, and Drogba picked a huge long axe. The axe blade was almost as long as a door. It would make anyone who looked at it feel a chill to their bones. Warden Oleg finally felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. However, after seeing the king's serious face, he didn't dare ask any questions. He used his 1-star energy to pick up a long blade that was taller than himself and stood quietly beside Faye. After seeing there was no more sets of armor and weapons for him, Brooke panicked. "Your Majesty, stay on the defensive wall. Hold Shamboard together for me until I return." Faye pressed Brooke's shoulder and said seriously, "You are the only one that I trust in here." Brooke's body froze. He was stunned by Faye's words. Faye didn't say anything more. He grabbed 46 water bags filled with clean water by the soldiers under his instruction and walked into the watchtower to hide from everyone's sight. After he was inside the building, he grabbed the bottle of normal healing potion and the bottle of stamina potion from his belt storage and dripped a couple drops of each potions individually into 23 water bags. He shook the bags to mix the water and potions together and called in the 20 heavy metal armored iron men. Each of them got 2 bags. The god of war showed his mercy and blessed us. The water in the blue bag will get rid of your tiredness and the water in the red bag will heal any types of injuries. When we get to the enemy formations, make sure to protect yourselves properly. When you get injured or become tired, drink the water right away. Pierce and the others were delighted after they heard that. Although they had a lot of physical strength, after wearing 60 to 70 pounds of armor and using 40 to 50 pounds weapons, any man would feel tired eventually. However, the 2 bags of magic water from King Alexander had solved all their concerns. The warden Oleg had finally understood why the king let him get a set of the valuable armor. His face turned pale, sweat came off of his body like rain, and his mind turned completely blank. He stuttered, "Yo, your Majas, Jesty, I. Faye stared at him coldly. Oleg's heart stopped pounding for a second. He sweat even more, but didn't dare to say a word. Everyone take a mouthful of the water in the blue water bag. Get ready to battle. Faye put on the heavy knight armor that he had before he entered Diablo World as he said to the strong men. Gulp, gulp. Pierce and others chugged down some water in the blue water bag. As soon as the water entered their mouth, gasps filled the room. A shocking expression covered everyone's face. They all clearly felt that a special kind of power seeped through every part of their bodies, and they were suddenly filled with power. The weight of the armor disappeared, and they all felt like they were wearing a thin shirt. Not only could they run, but they could jump into the air easily. The 40 to 50-pound weapons suddenly felt like straw, as if they weren't holding anything. Everything felt like a beautiful illusion. But from their buddies' shocked expressions, they finally confirmed that their feelings weren't illusions, but actual magical effects like mages' weightless spells. It was a miracle. When we get to the bottom of the defensive wall, everyone listen to my order. If anyone disobeys, they shall be executed on the spot. Faye stared at the warrior that he picked out. He raised up his huge double-handed axe and grabbed it with his right hand. With the axe in his right hand and helmet under his left armpit, he left the watchtower first. Move out. The team of warriors left the watchtower valiantly. Some soldiers had followed Faye's instructions and prepared 20 thick ropes and hung them off of the defensive wall. Pierce was at the very front. He put the helmet on his head and waved his hammer to the surrounding soldiers as a goodbye. The operation was really risky and no one knew if they would make it back alive. Pierce didn't mind and laughed as he held onto the rope and jumped off of the wall. The diluted stamina potion had pumped the endurance of Pierce to another level. Although he was wearing a set of heavy armor, he was still very fast and flexible, like a wild ape. He slid down to the bottom of the defensive wall. Boom! Pierce landed on the ground and left a deep footprint into the ground. Boom! 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 Like 20 iron robots, the other strong men shook the ground as well as they landed by sliding down the rope. They quickly organized themselves into a V-shaped formation, with Pierce standing at the very front. Faye was still on the defensive wall. As he put on the helmet and was about to slide down the rope, he heard a cry from far away. "Alexander, don't go!" A beautiful girl rushed up the stairs of the defensive wall as she held up the edges of her dress and tried not to fall. She yelled in her cries, trying to stop Alexander from leaving the castle and put himself in danger. Faye could even see the panicked expression on her pretty face. "Angela?" Faye stared at her for a couple seconds, but to Faye, it felt like eternity. He had engraved Angela's appearance into his mind. He didn't say anything back. He put on the helmet and held tightly to the rope. He looked at Angela, who was running towards him passionately from the eye holes on the faceplate one last time as he turned around and jumped off of the wall. When the operation initiated, it needed to be executed accurately and fast. A second of delay meant that the enemies would discover them a second earlier. That might put the warriors in a terrible situation. Faye didn't have time to talk to Angela, not even 1 second. "Alexander!" Tears rolled down Angela's face as she finally got onto the defensive wall and saw Faye jump off. Faye's bright eyes under his faceplate as he looked back, and the way he turned around made a mark on her heart. She wouldn't be able to forget this moment in her life. "Alexander, you have to come back. You will be a great king and Chambord will be proud of you and you will be a legend on Azeroth continent. I will wait for that day." As if she had lost her soul, Angela leaned against a battlement on the defensive wall so she wouldn't fall down. She stared at the man who slid down the defensive wall, joined the strong men, reassembled the formation and led the attack on the crawling snake-like enemy. Her ocean-like eyes didn't even blink once. She stared at Faye firmly. "Come back alive." On the south bank of Zuli River, the autumn wind blew off the yellow leaves on the trees. A furry squirrel was standing on its feet in alert and looking around. It relaxed as it saw that the surrounding was clear and started nibbling a pine cone happily. Birds flew freely to the blue sky far away. It was a magnificent scene-off autumn. But suddenly, clip-clop, clip-clop. It was the sound of hooves rapidly tapping the ground. It was noisy and the ground was shaking. The squirrel threw the half-cracked pine cone and crawled up a tree in a panic, and the birds were scared away. High-pitched hoarse whinnies came from far away. After the chaos settled down, the silver-masked knight and his black knights showed up on the south bank of Zueli River. The silver-masked knight looked up to the sky to roughly check the time, and took out an eagle eye to observe the status of the soldiers on the defensive wall of Chambord. The eagle eye was a delicate magical item. It was like a smaller telescope, but the 2 crystal lenses in it had been blessed with the eagle eye spell, which allowed the user to see far away. Even the antenna of an ant could be seen clearly from miles away. Through the eagle eye, he saw the deformed faces of the soldiers due to their fatigue and dread. They lacked proper defenses, and the soldiers were taking off their armor lazily, which messed up the defensive positioning. Everything was going as he had expected. A sneer came on his face. "Pass down my command. Everyone get ready to?" He suddenly stopped. He didn't have a chance to say the word siege. While viewing the defensive wall through his eagle eye, he saw 20 or so buff guys with heavy armor sliding down the defensive wall with ropes. "This is..." The silver-masked knight was surprised for a moment. But after he saw the fully armor enemies assembling into a standard wedge-charging formation, he understood their intents completely. After a brief moment of startle, a disdain and banter expression came on his face. He was even a little bit dumbfounded. "Ha ha! King of Chambord. It looks like I overestimated you." What a dumbass. Good thinking, but do you think you could break my formations with only 20-ish men? If it's like that, let's have an appetizer before the main siege. The silver-masked knight laughed. He pointed his horsewhip at the dumb enemies and said, 2, 3. Adjust the tower shield formation into a defense position. Let those statue-like heavy asses come closer. Chop their heads off within 10 seconds. Moo dash! A loud trumpet filled the sky, and the breathtaking silence that enveloped the people of Chambord had finally been broken. The trumpet was the military command. The formations were like precise machines and started transforming right away. Tap, 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 tap. The formation transformed in the daunting uniformed stepping noise. The tower shield formation that was closest to Chambord didn't move too much. The sides moved forward a bit and the middle moved back a bit into a concave defense position. Tink, tink, tink dash. The sound of heavy metal grinding on each other came from the formation. On top of the 3-yard high tower shields, 5-yard long iron dragon lances extended out. Under the bright sun, the shiny, dense lances looked like the teeth of the sneering grim reaper. The lances all pointed forward and the enemies in the formation were silent. The whole formation was like a huge mad steel hedgehog. If an elephant charged at the formation, it would be plunged into kebabs. On the other side, the 20-ish fully armored soldiers charged as if they weren't afraid of death. It was a disproportional battle. Glancing from the sky, it looked like a couple ants were boldly provoking an elephant. The ants would easily be squished into meat paste if the elephant stomped its foot. The taste of death from the lances had darkened the bright sun. No one questioned the effectiveness of the lances in terms of penetrating any type of armor. Even iron plates that were 2-inch, 5 centimeters, thick would be easily torn open by these pointed lances that had 4-inch, 10 centimeters, handles supporting them. However, the V-shaped wedge formation ant charge didn't slow down at all. They sped up as if they wanted to break the lethal lances with their bodies. No one made a noise. The air also froze. Everyone could hear their own heartbeat. On the defensive wall, everyone couldn't help but lean their bodies forward against the battlements to try to see everything clearly. Angela's eyes were filled with tears and worry. Her hands grabbed onto the edges of her dress tightly and almost tore through it. Emma followed Angela onto the defensive wall as well, and she held her arms in front of her chest and held her breath. On the other side of the Zuli River, the silver-masked knight had already put away the eagle eye. He was still sneering as he stared at the presumptuous ants. How dare a dog challenge the honor of a dragon? Cruel expressions appeared on the dozen black knights' faces who were standing behind the silvered-masked knight. Like hungry wolves that had spotted a delicious treat in the dark night, they licked their mouths while sneering. Near the bridge, the distance between the ants and the iron hedgehog was decreasing fast. 20 yards, 16 yards, 13 yards, 10 yards, The silver-masked knight sat up a little higher on the horse. The arc of his smile grew larger and larger, as if he was envisioning the spurting blood and devastating screams of the opponents. The ending was that simple in his eyes. The concave tower shield formation only needed to close and surround the enemies in the middle, just like stuffing a dumpling. These dumb heavy metal armored opponents would be kibabbed by the lances after a couple easy thrusts and pulls. He wasn't worried at all about the ants messing up the tower shield formation. There were 3 layers of tower shields which were each 3 yards tall. Each shield weighed more than 100 pounds, 50 kilograms, and they were supported by elite soldiers and numerous additional iron rods. With this kind of defensive formation, it would hold the front charges of heavy cavalry for more than 10 minutes. The silver-masked knight didn't hide his mocking smile at all. However, he froze the next second, as if he was struck by invisible lightning. His body stiffened and his eyeballs almost fell out of his eye sockets. Gasps came from the black knights behind him. The military horses they were riding that normally marched uniformly, even under severe injuries, began whinnying and backing off uncontrollably, because 2 to 3 seconds ago, a thunder-like roar came from the other side of the stone bridge. God bless! the head ant who was leading the V charge threw his huge black axe forward forcefully after his roar. Whoosh, 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 dash. The axe turned into a gray shadow and spun insanely, tearing up the air and even the space around it. Boom! Many screamed could be heard and blood spurted to the sky and fell back down like a blood rain. The huge black axe smashed into the refined iron tower shields. Like a sharp knife that was cutting through a piece of well-done steak, and like a god's fist that came down from the sky and crushed a tree, the tower shields that could block heavy cavalry deformed a little in the metal collision. However, after a brief moment of pause, the power that the axe was carrying exploded and more than 10 huge shields were blown away, like dried leaves in a blizzard. Unstoppable. Absolutely unstoppable. The huge axe didn't feel like an axe, but rather a punishment from the enraged god of war. With the unstoppable momentum and devastating power, it would crush even the most majestic mountain Tangolian if it was here. The axe had blown a 2-yard-wide bloody gap on the tower shield formation that was as tight as a wall. Broken limbs and blood fell from the sky and decorated the other shields. The formation went into chaos. The elite soldiers behind the shields didn't expect that anyone in the world could break their defense like that, not even in their wildest dreams. The cruel reality took them by surprise. It was so astonishing that they forgot about the proper actions of a soldier and their harsh discipline. This let their opponents break into their formation through the gap filled with blood. They were previously mocking the 20-ish dumb pigs who were charging at them in their minds. But after the blink of an eye, the dumb pigs had ripped off their weak disguises and stepped into the formation like overbearing demons. Their weapons were like the sickles, while they were the representatives of the Grim Reaper himself. Everywhere they went, blood spurted and deathly screams were heard. The front layer of soldiers lost their shield's protection and fell like crops under the sickles. No one could last for more than a second. The battle between the ants and the elephant turned into a one-sided slaughter of the elephants. The roles of the two sides were inconceivably reversed in that second. The gasps of the soldiers, the screams of the wounded, the yelling of the officers, the colliding and breaking sound of metal, these sounds that would normally cause a chill to people's bones joined together under the defensive wall and formed a deathly symphony. A round of cheers came from the defensive wall. It was too difficult to contain. All their fears and worries turned into loud cheers. The godlike axe strike hit the tower shield dragon lance formation, but it also hit the heart of everyone on the wall. It was like a torch fire in the darkness. It gave them hope and ignited their blood and souls. On the defensive wall, everyone knew who that axe belonged to. Everyone knew whose face was under that helmet, because everyone had watched the young and brave king slide down the defensive wall and stand at the very front of the other men. His back faced his followers as he faced the cruelest enemies. Everyone on the wall was crying. They screamed, jumped, and threw their arms into the air wildly, as if they could empower the brave men who charged into the enemies and fought alongside their king. On the other side of the Zuli River, the silver-masked knight was feeling gloomy. His attitude of watching a good show with confidence disappeared. His expression was like that of finding out that he had bit on a hard rock and chipped his teeth after biting into a piece of delicious flesh. After that axe was thrown, his heart beat faster and he knew something was wrong. The tower shield formation that he was proud of didn't even hold for 1 second, and was smashed open by the enemies. Their ease in charging into the formation was a huge slap to his face. The devastating power that the axe carried made him feel threatened for the first time. This shouldn't have been the power of any man. There wasn't any surge of energy, so what kind of power was that? Black Knights, pass down my command. Abandon the chaotic front formation and transform to lock formation. Make sure to envelop those guys. Put up the dragon lances and keep some distance. Don't fight them recklessly. The silver-masked knight calmed himself down quickly and displayed proper adaptation abilities and executed another plan. His eyes weren't fooled. He could tell that the death squad of 20-ish weren't star warriors, but simply ordinary men who had a ton of physical strength. When the battle went on, they would tire out eventually and it would be easy to kill them. However, the silver-masked knight didn't want to wait any longer. Although he was trained to be calm during any situation and was taught many techniques to command armies and read people's minds, After consecutive losses in battle against ant-like enemies, he felt ashamed. He decided not to wait any longer and crush the enemies with the most powerful method he had and conquer Chambord Castle at once. After he thought about it for a while, he spoke coldly while biting his teeth. Tell the 3-star warrior Landis to stop protecting the trebuchets and join forces with the rest of the tower shield soldiers to eliminate those bastards right away. Get the rest of the army prepared. Start sieging right after that. After the silver-masked knight thought about the 2 commands and made sure that they covered everything, he waved his horsewhip and the black knights rushed to pass on the commands. On the bridge, the battle was still continuing. By using the monstrous strength of the level 12 barbarian, Fei smashed open a way into the formation. The 22 strongmen followed him tightly. Together, they were like a matchless blade that pierced the enemy's heart. The tower shield formation had a great amount of frontal defense. Even charging cavalry couldn't break through them easily. However, the soldiers behind the shields only wore thin leather armor. Once the enemies break through, without the protection of the huge iron shields, they would be like pigs in a slaughterhouse. Pierce and Drogba were right behind Fei. Both of them were the strongest men in Chambord. The war hammer and axe were slamming and crashing into the enemies with a huge amount of force. The tower shield enemies were killed when the weapons hit them and wounded when the weapons touched them. There was nothing that could stop them. On the thin bridge, red blood decorated everything. Wherever the death squad went turned to chaos. Due to the terrain restrictions, although there were more enemies, they weren't able to surround Fei and the strongmen properly. The width of the bridge could only hold about 15 men, so their numbers advantage couldn't be utilized and they had the disadvantage. In the chaos, an enemy officer who was nearing a 1-star warrior saw that the man who gave the tower shield formation a deadly blow didn't have a weapon anymore. He was extremely excited. He thought the goddess of luck had blessed him. He picked up a half-broken dragon lance and sneakily used the scarce energy he had to thrust it at Fei when he thought Fei's guard was down. Although the lance was half-broken, it weighed about 50 to 60 pounds. With a ton of momentum and energy of an almost 1-star warrior, the tip of the lance shined like a bloodthirsty light. It was aimed at Fei's heart. Go to hell! The enemy officer laughed as if he already saw the opponent's blood shoot out of his chest as his heart was pierced. Without a doubt, if he could kill a man who was so strong, it would be a great military honor and he would soon be promoted to higher ranks. But the officer's smile froze on his face. It soon turned into a deformed, pale face that was experiencing a ton of pain and fear. The weaponless man didn't panic at all after seeing sneak attack. Instead, a cunning and gloating smile could be seen under the man's faceplate. He reached his hands into the air. After a flash of white light, like magic, another huge axe appeared in his hand out of nowhere. Tink! A frontal chop. The axe accurately chopped the tip of the lance. After the sparks from the colliding metals faded, the axe's blade turned into a white thin line in the officer's eyes. Like a sharp knife cutting through a soft milk cake, the axe separated the iron lance in half. With the remaining momentum, the axe also went through his body. He felt cold. The dragon lance, the officer, the axe went through both of them easily. After a brief pause, they both separated into 2 pieces each. There was no way that the blood could stop. The man's bright red internal organs, his limbs covering his white bones, and the heated dragon lance fell everywhere. The blood in the air touched the broken lances, which were still heated due to the high friction from the collision. It turned into a cloud of bloody steam. More blood spilled onto the lance, and the steam generated almost filled the surroundings of the corpse. The air was completely red and smelt horrible. Ahahahaha! A couple soldiers who were standing beside the officer were terrified. Their minds couldn't take it and broke down. As if they had lost their souls. They screamed and tried to escape from the demons in front of them. Unfortunately for them, there were layers of tower shields and dragon lances positioned behind them. When they turned around to escape, they were forced into them by their own comrades behind them, making them into kebabs. However, the severe injuries didn't kill them instantly. They screamed and cried as they died painfully. Fei took the magic axe of the level 12 barbarian. After he sneak attacked the enemy officer, He gave it a full swing, and the couple enemy soldiers in front of him didn't even get a chance to run away. They were separated into halves along with their weapons from the waist down. Behind him, the fully protected, heavily armored strongmen started slaughtering the terrified soldiers. The heavy armors that they were wearing allowed them to ignore the attacks of the enemies, and on the other hand, their huge hammers and axes harvested the enemies' lives relentlessly. Even if the enemies could react and block their attacks, under the monstrous strength of the strongmen, the enemy soldiers would be smashed into pieces with their weapons or blown away by the strong force. That was the power of the enraged strongmen in close combat. After drinking the diluted stamina potion, the strongmen temporarily had unlimited endurance. They could abuse their strength endlessly without tiring themselves out. The heavy armor and weapons didn't weight them down at all and instead became the enemy's worst nightmare. The unbreakable suits of heavy armor, and with unblockable weapons, they were like a team of war beasts from hell. The 23 men were like 23 fully armored hungry tigers who were led into a barn of sheep. You can already infer the outcome. The king, Alexander, was at the very front of their meat grinder formation. There were no soldiers among the enemies who could take one strike from him. He was almost pushing forward at the same speed that he charged in at. The front portion of the tower shield formation was torn into chaos. The enemies who were at the back of the formation tried to hold their positions, but the enemy soldiers in the front were broken. They felt like they were facing a bunch of demons and wanted to have 2 more legs so that they could run faster away from them. All they could do now was follow their instincts and run for their lives. Many of them weren't rookies on the battlefield, but they never experienced a one-sided massacre like this. They couldn't even fight back. How could they just wait for their deaths? Even though they were all elite soldiers, there was only one thing that was on all their minds, and that was escape. Run as far away as they could. Run from these unkillable demons. At this point, someone had to stand out and re-establish the order in this chaos. The Black Knight, too, who was the commander of the tower shield formation, had finally gained back his senses after the shock that horrifying strike gave him. After seeing the chaos in his formations, he knew that he had to prevent it from getting any worse. He pulled out his commander's sword and struck at the couple soldiers who were escaping. Those soldiers didn't even have time to react, and their heads flew off. The headless bodies continued the motions of running back for a couple steps before falling. The blood spewed out like a fountain. Hold the formation. Reassemble the second defense line. Anyone who backs off shall be executed. No exceptions. Tu's sword was still dripping blood as he shouted. Under the death threat, most of the soldiers in the formation was forced to calm down. They came together slowly and stabilized the formation. After seeing his formation was reformed, Tu calmed down a little bit. He sent off many commands to rebuild the proper defensive power of the formation. With the commander in position, the soldiers had demonstrated their superior battle abilities. They abandoned the chaotic front soldiers and backed off a little bit as a formation to clear out about 4-5 yards of space. In a couple seconds, layers of tower shields were established and rows of lethal dragon lances were pointed out again. It brought back the original power of the formation. Tink! The tower shield dragon lance formation was stable once again. Black 2 positioned himself behind the formation, staring at the 23 armored marching beasts. He sneered. There wasn't enough distance between his formation and the beasts, so they couldn't pick up enough momentum to strike like that again, and there was no way that they could break open the defense again. As long as the new defense line doesn't get torn open again, the dragon lances could easily pierce the amours and the bodies of the bastards. Black Knight, Tu thought coldly. He was staring at the front line closely through the thin gap between shields. With this new transformation, he had abandoned more than 30 soldiers outside of the formation. Those fully armored beasts were wiping out the poor soldiers like leaves. Blood, torn limbs, broken weapons were scattering everywhere. Tu had to admit that those beasts were indeed brutal monsters. The huge weapons in their hands even gave him, a 1-star warrior, a chill. Under such terrain constraints, it would be a nightmare for any army to deal with these fully armored beasts. Especially the man at the front, compared to the chill that the weapon made him feel, that man made Tu feel like he was in a freezer. The man was the smallest in size among his peers, but he was also the strongest and most wild one. 2. Remembered clearly that from the beginning of the battle, that man threw out a monstrous axe and blew open the unbreakable tower shield dragon lance formation like a god. Whenever Tu thought back to it, even him who was a veteran on the battlefield was scared. Through the thin gaps between shields, Tu could see clearly that that man somehow got another even more dangerous-looking axe. The axe was larger than a door. It had a ton of dangerous-looking back hooks. The black axe was glistening red from all the blood. It looked so heavy that it should only be lifted by 2 or 3 soldiers. However, the way that man was using it was like the axe weighed as much as a straw. Whenever he struck with that door, no one would be left standing. That man was like killing machine made for battle. 30 well-trained elite soldier couldn't even hold the metal monsters off for 20 seconds. They were all turned into corpses, particularly ugly corpses. They were either chopped into a couple pieces or smashed into meat paste. Limbs, organs, weapons, they were all broken everywhere. Wherever they went, except for the bridge itself, nothing was left in its original form. At this point, the black armored enemies had backed off 50 yards, 46 meters, on the bridge. It felt like an eternity for the enemy army and the defending soldiers on the defensive wall of Chambord. But the whole process only took 40 seconds. God bless. Fei didn't forget to continue motivating the strongmen. His axe didn't slow down as he shouted. Whoosh, whoosh, he made 2 chops and the enemy in front of him was sliced into 3 pieces. He looked up and realized that the chaotic formation had already backed off 2 yards and set up another layer of defense. Fei was slightly surprised. The enemy's reaction and reassembly speed was beyond his expectations. It looked like pushing forward would be much more difficult now. However, there was no way to pull back an arrow that had already been shot. Fei clearly knew that he would have to break the tower shield formation with the strongmen and destroy the siege ladders and trebuchets as fast as they could. At this point, time was life. Their charging speed couldn't slow down. Everything had to be completed before the enemy's commander could react and send orders. Otherwise, once they get crowded and the enemy's star-ranked warriors arrived, the 22 strongmen that weren't star-ranked warrior and had no energy would not be able to escape, even if Fei could escape by himself. With me as the center, reassemble the all formation. Quick! 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 Following Fei's shout, the 22 strongmen who were loosely positioned due to the battle quickly restored their formation. Pierce and Drogba stood left and right behind Fei respectively. Both of them were covered in the enemy's blood. Circles of blood and bone fragments slid off of their weapons, giving them the appearance of demons from hell. The other strongmen behind them looked very similar, as if they had walked through a rain of blood. Their armor was still dripping in blood, and the only color you could see on them was red. Because Fei, the supermincer, was leading the way, any enemy that could threaten them was killed by him right away, so the strongmen didn't suffer any casualties. The most damage the enemies dealt were some marks on the heavy armor. Everyone drink some water in the blue water bag and wait for my commands. When I signal, charge right away. Fei told the strongmen behind him and charged up by himself. Bam, bam, bam dash. While he was charging towards the enemies, he kicked over a couple corpses, which caused them to fly over the 3-yard tall tower shields and smash into the enemies behind the shields. There was some yelling and shouting behind those shields, but it didn't fall into chaos. In fact, Fei didn't expect that a couple corpses would mess up the enemies. 2 to 3 yards of distance took less than a second for the level 12 barbarian Fei to charge through. But Fei did something else during the process. Switch mode. He said that, in his mind, and Necromancer Fei took over. Suddenly, a white light flashed and the huge axe in his hand disappeared, and so did the monstrous physical strength of the barbarian. Instead, a gloomy white death energy clouded him like mist. At the same time, the Necromancer's skills were activated as well. Corpse explosion. Many small, almost invisible clouds of death energy shot out of Fei's palm. They flashed through the thin gaps between the shields and entered the corpses that were kicked into the center of the new formation. Explode! 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 Fei yelled in his mind. Suddenly, Behind the steel wall that blocked Faye's path, there were large booming sounds, and then daunting screams followed. The corpse explosion used. The enemies that were hiding behind the tower shields was scorning Faye's decision to throw corpses at them. If a few corpses could create chaos, they wouldn't be called elites. However, not even in their wildest dreams would they have ever expected the corpses to explode like that. The explosions were intense, too. The dense blood and minced flesh instantly penetrated their leather armor, and the exploding bone fragments were like arrows that easily penetrated their metal armor. Because they did not pay much attention to those corpses, the causalities were huge. More than 20 enemies were instantly killed without even making a sound. There were more unfortunate enemies who got their limbs blown off, but didn't die right away. They rolled on the bridge as they screamed painfully. There were also a couple of really unlucky enemies who didn't get injured at all, but due to all the chaos, they were accidentally bumped off of the bridge into the fast current of the Zuli River. Their heads came up out of the water a few times as they tried to survive, but they were soon devoured by the current and disappeared. Corpse explosion was too powerful. It even caught Black Knight, too, by surprise, and a bone fragment had penetrated his left arm. It left a hole about the size of a thumb, and blood just wouldn't stop flowing out. Although he had energy in his body to add more defensive abilities, it wasn't enough to entirely block the damage from corpse explosion. If he wasn't wearing that black mask, his soldiers would all see his pale and twisted face. None of them knew why and how the corpses suddenly exploded and caused another round of chaos. On the other side, Faye's charging speed didn't slow down at all. After corpse explosion, he instantly switched back to barbarian mode. With the return of his physical strength, he roared as he stomped the ground with both of his feet. The hard stone bridge formed cracks as he initiated the barbarian skill. Leap. Whoosh. Like a magnificent mountain that suddenly took off, Faye's body created a large shadow under the bright sun. He jumped up at least 5 yards high and leaped over the iron hedgehog like tower shields and dragon lances, and was about to land onto the enemies behind them. "You're dead now." Black Knight, too, saw that this opponent flew over the front line and didn't have any weapons. He knew that it was a great opportunity. He didn't care about the injury on his left arm. He also jumped up as he concentrated all his energy into his right arm and stabbed his sword at Faye. He was trying to use his delicate and efficient sword techniques to kill the bull in front of him who only had strength. He was confident that he could win the battle in midair, since he was way more agile. With the opponent wearing such heavy armor, he was sure that he had at least 100 ways to penetrate the beast's heart without getting him dodging. However, "Fuck off!" Faye shouted in midair and kicked Tu's sword right on the neck. Tu only felt something flash before his eyes and wasn't able to catch the opponent's movements at all. He soon felt that his body was numb and sore, as if he was struck by lightning. He wasn't able to hold onto his sword, and it was kicked off of his hand and flew off like an ant in a storm. Poo dash! Blood rushed out of Tu's right hand. It was torn open by the handle of the sword from the power of Faye's kick. However, Tu's nightmare didn't stop there. Before he landed on the ground, Faye gave him another kick. This time, Faye kicked Tu right in the chest. Crunching and cracking bone sounds came from inside of Tu's body, and a deep and terrifying foot-shaped hole appeared on his chest. Suddenly, his fall accelerated and he smashed onto other enemy soldiers. The enemies fell down like dominoes with a background music of screaming. Tu's heart was crushed into pieces after he was kicked in the chest. There was absolutely no life inside of him. He didn't make any sounds when he finally fell to the ground. He couldn't be any deader. His eyes were open wide and filled with shock, as if the last question on his mind before he died was how a one-star warrior could die like a chicken under the feet of a man who didn't even have energy. Of course, if Tu knew that the man he was about to take on was the beast that killed 2 one-star warriors in yesterday's siege, his first reaction would be to escape as fast as he could and not take on this man to try to accumulate military credits. Unfortunately, life didn't give any second chances. When Faye was a level 5 barbarian, he was able to easily kill one-star warriors. After he leveled up the level 12, he could kill guys like two by simply waving his hands. After seeing their own commander being killed in a single kick, the formation became even more chaotic. Fei landed firmly in the middle of all the enemies and called upon his axe. After a white flash of light, the barbarian's huge, dangerous axe was in his hands once more. Tink, 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 tink. He did a ruthless 360 degrees spin, almost forming a blade storm. It sliced all the enemies who were coming close to him, including their weapons. Under the spilling blood, Fei quickly approached the tower shields. He applied all his strength, and all the support beams for the shields and lances were chopped into pieces of scrap metal under the reflection of sunlight from the blade of the axe. All the tower shields that were covered by the 3 layers of metal were also chopped into 2 pieces and were kicked off the bridge into the Zuli River. They created many ripples in the water. The tower shield dragon lance formation that was once considered indestructible in many people's eyes had just been torn apart like a soft slice of bread. Moreover, it had been torn open by Fei. Again. Charge! Clean out these bastards! Fei switched between Necromancer mode and Barbarian mode and destroyed the newly reassembled Tower Shield Dragon lance formation in less than a minute. As many people were still in a big shock, Fei waved at the strong men who had just drank the diluted stamina potion and signaled them to charge. Bam! 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 It felt like a heavy cavalry was charging when the 22 strongmen began running. It gave people who were watching an illusion of the whole stone bridge shaking under their feet, ready to collapse at any second. The blood and pieces of flesh on the 22 sets of armor made them look like demons from hell. Boom! More close combat fights erupted, and blood and limbs began to fly everywhere. The armored strongmen charged into the chaotic sea of enemies and the massive weapons danced in their hands. The enemies were sent flying off of the bridge like kites. They fell into the river like dumplings and were washed away by the fast currents. Fei didn't slow down either. His axe returned back to being the Grim Reaper's sickle. It wiped out everything that it touched, like a broom sweeping up the dust. After every strike, there were fewer people on the bridge. Fei intentionally increased his charging speed this time. To increase his speed, he paid less attention to the strongmen behind him. He only killed the enemies that were directly in his line of sight after he had broken into the enemies' formations. The enemies that slipped through Fei's axe were left for the strongmen to handle. This way, their pushing speed would be much faster. However, the strongmen were facing more pressure. The enemies were all well-trained soldiers. Most of them were veterans and some of them even had tiny amounts of energy. In combat, their attacks were somewhat threatening to the strongmen. Although their armor protected the strongmen from the blades, the shocks that came with the attacks numbed their body parts. Soon, some of the strongmen became lightly injured, but they knew that there was no way rather than hoping to kill more enemies. They didn't want to become a burden on their king. No matter how severe their injuries were, they bit their teeth to endure the pain and followed their king closely. Fei had discovered this was well. He spun his huge axe and created another blade storm. He turned the approaching enemies into dusts of blood and filled the battlefield with sounds of cracking weapons and bones. He then quickly switched modes again. Barbarian mode disappeared. Paladin mode was initiated. Suddenly, a divine and pure energy came out of Fei's body and surrounded the Iron Men behind him. Fei stomped his feet, and a golden ring expanded from his body. All the strongmen felt that the injuries in their bodies were healing quickly as soon as the ring covered them. Their waning strength was recovering at an insane rate, and even their confidence and courage were boosted. It was Paladin's aura. Prayer? Hail the king! Pierce yelled as he sensed it. He felt his blood burning and really wanted to kill more enemies. His war hammer was like an extension of the god of war's arm. After a horizontal strike, the cracking sound of metal breaking was as dense as putting cold water into a pot of boiling oil. 4 or 5 enemies screamed as they were blown away by the hammer and flew off of the bridge into the river. Hail King Alexander! Drogba followed. He gripped the sword that an enemy was striking him with using his left arm, and chopped at the enemy with the axe in the right hand. Snip! The head of the owner of the sword was sent flying to the sky. "Hail the king!" The rest of the strongmen roared together. Their damage output skyrocketed, as if they had transformed into wild tigers. Even Warden Oleg, who was timid and at the very back, seemed to be influenced by the atmosphere. He was finally able to properly use his one-star warrior's strength and chopped the 3 enemies in front of him. "Shit! That man is a holy knight. Wow, battle ring, that's a battle ring. God, it's the Ode of Life battle ring. Fall back. Retreat. Ask the commander to send star-ranked warriors to kill this holy knight." Damn, since they have a high-class holy knight who has acquired the Ode of Life battle ring, we won't have a number advantage at all. After the gold ring appeared under Faye's foot, gasps and shouts sounded from the enemies. As professional soldiers, the enemies knew exactly what having a high-level holy knight in battle meant. Holy knights were super healing machines. As long as a holy knight could continue the Ode of Life battle ring, the opponents would never run out of strength and stamina. Especially on a thin bridge like this, with a bunch of strong beasts and a high-class holy knight, there was only one outcome: a one-sided massacre. After they thought about it, some enemies who were brave enough to plan to gain back control by using their number advantage began to doubt themselves again. Their courage was like a thin layer of snow in a hot summer day. It quickly melted and disappeared as it turned into vapor. However, Faye didn't give these enemies time to retreat. Roar! Faye stomped his feet again and the miracle reappeared. A green ring expanded from his body and had a radius about 5 to 6 yards. All the strongmen were empowered as well. Suddenly, Pierce, Drogba, and the other strongmen felt like their strength had more than doubled. The enemies were way weaker, like fragile ceramics. They would fall off of the bridge or fly to the sky after they were just barely touched by the strongmen's weapons. Paladin's aura? Might? Appeared in the real world for the very first time. Oh shit! It's the double damage battle ring? God, a double ring? That man acquired a second type of battle ring? Da fuck? Retreat! We're no match. Archers. Shit, where are the fucking archers? Shoot them. Quickly. The enemy's eyeballs almost popped out of their eye sockets again. They were almost having a mental breakdown. The situation on the bridge was even more chaotic. If the first golden aura had only forced the enemies to think about giving up and retreat and shake their confidence, then the second green aura had definitely crushed them. They had no courage to fight back anymore. On Azeroth continent, holy knights had way more deterring effects due to the existence of the influential Holy Church. Many formal holy knight groups had taken important seats among all the other powerful and deeply rooted forces on Azeroth continent. Holy knights could be assembled into formations and sweep their enemies easily, and they could also fight individually. Their insane endurance, along with all the mysterious supportive battle rings that granted abilities such as healing, damage, and curses, were the worst nightmare for any army. Holy knights were the star players in any battlefield. Therefore, after Faye used the paladin's auras, the whole tower shield dragon lance formation gave up their defense and started retreating as fast as they could. There were many similarities between the paladin in the Diablo world and the holy knight on Azeroth continent. Some paladin skills and auras looked a lot like the battle rings of the holy knight. This caused the enemies to believe that Faye was a holy knight and acquired battle rings, so they had no courage to fight at all. Under the deterrence of a holy knight as well as the death of the commander of the formation, the enemy soldiers escaped as if they were mice that had seen some big cats. The level of chaos was getting worse and worse. Some of the enemies were bumped into the river by others, and some even ran in the opposite direction and were made into porcupines by Chambord's archers. Most of the enemies turned around and tried to rush back to their base. But due to the chaos, they ran and pushed against the formation that was guarding the siege ladders. Great opportunity. Charge. Faye saw the enemies retreating as fast as they could after he used the auras, prayer, and might. Although he didn't know why, he knew it was a splendid opportunity to charge forward. He shouted as he charged with the strongmen and soon dismantled the tower shield dragon lance formation. The formation that could block off heavy cavalry charges only lasted less than 2 minutes under the crazy charge of Faye and the strongmen and was turned into piles of limbs and shattered metal. The thin bridge turned into a road of death and blood. Pierce, Drogba. Push those siege ladders into the river. Quick! Faye made a path to the next formation with his axe and finally approached the siege ladder. At that point, they had pushed about 60 yards, into the bridge. Faye blocked off the flooding enemies on his own and commanded Pierce and Drogba to organize the strongmen and destroy the siege ladders. As you wish, your majesty, the two answered, and their weapons were like windmills in their hands and smashed a number of enemies away. Then they roared as they targeted the siege ladders. Boom! Boom! Although the enemies who were guarding the siege ladders fought back aggressively, they were no match. The two siege ladders were soon pushed into the river by the strongmen, created a huge splash of water as if a huge creature was billowing below the river. Their morale was high. After they destroyed two siege ladders, like a pack of hungry wolves, they roared as they charged towards the remaining 4 siege ladders. Once they destroyed all the siege ladder, they would have completed half of the mission. At this moment, moo moo moo! Clear and crisp bugles sounded from the south bank of the Zuli River. Many commands were communicated to the enemies who were battling on the bridge through different melodies and lengths of the bugle sounds. However, the enemies stared at each other and couldn't execute the commands. The series of commands were for the Tower Shield Dragon Lance formation, but the formation that was once honored as the number 1 defense in the army had been wiped out by the group of beasts under their desperate charges. No one could have guessed that only 20-ish men could destroy more than 100 well-trained Tower Shield Dragon Lance soldiers. Although the time gap between the deliveries of 2 sets of commands was only 2 minutes, it was useless now. It was too late.